Welcome everyone to the Stateless Atheist, where religion, politics, and society collide. Today I have a treat for you. My friends Ryan, Alex, and myself sat down and watched Capturing Christianity's review of the movies God's Not Dead. Oddly, we were quite pleased with the review they gave. We weren't sure because we didn't watch the video beforehand. Now, you might be wondering why we care about a channel like Capturing Christianity. That is because they have a large following, and while they try to be better than a Kent Hovind or a Ken Ham, if you listen to the channel long enough, you will see the bigotry and sometimes even the anti-science slip through the cracks. I will do a video on that in the future. Well, let's begin.
Guys, for joining me. I'm Cameron Bertuzzi. Welcome to Capturing Christianity. Today we're looking at God's Not Dead. This is our first movie review on the channel, and I've invited Dr. Randall Rouser. He's here with me. Well, Randall, why don't you say hi?
One thing I gotta say is he's always looking for a doctor. I don't know what it is. It's just like he's trying so hard to seem legitimate.
I mean, if I had a channel, I'd try to get doctors.
It's overly gratuitous.
Everyone
Yeah,
he
I
finds
could see that.
argues exactly what he wants, if you know what I mean. Like,
What's an echo chamber? What do you expect?
yes.
Which may be a kind of dogmatic thing of me to say, but, you know, whatever.
But today, like I said, we're talking about God's Not Dead. That's a movie that came out in 2014. There's actually 3 at the point that we're recording this, so it's 2020 as of this recording, and we're on God's Not Dead 3. But we wanted to do God's Not Dead 1. Randall, why don't you go ahead and explain, after we were discussing this, why reviewing this movie is...
And this seems to be a good one to begin with, especially because we're kind of coming at movies from the interest of theology, apologetics, and a Christian worldview. And God's Not Dead is kind of in your face with some of those themes. But also it's not a particularly subtle film. It paints in black and white strokes and in big...
Wow, I'm sorry, but that is so true. It is not subtle at all.
The last thing I'll say positively about it, I have 7 big areas where I think that it was a bad movie. But the last positive thing is there was one line in the movie where is he a reverend or a pastor? What was the guy's name that had the real 2008 haircut? Like split?
The main pastor, I forget his name. I just call him the Rev.
The Reverend, yeah. He said one thing, he texted to the main guy, Josh, and he said, quote, "Don't try to be clever," when he was giving him advice on how to deal with this atheist professor. He said, "Don't try to be clever, be content to tell the truth." That was a text that he sent him. And I think that that's actually a really, really good message for the pastor to send him, not just for a pastor to send somebody in this situation, but just more generally. I think that oftentimes when we're in this situation, or when we're in a situation like this, we tend to want to be clever. We want to sound smart. We want to say things that make us look a certain way instead of really just caring about what's true.
Now, I do have a quick question. So it sounds like at least the doctor here, it seemed like he had some cringe moments maybe. So I'm going to be curious to see like what he has to say about that.
Yeah.
I do agree with him about the clever point. I mean, that is, I think just generally speaking, I would prefer to have a conversation with someone who, you know, it's just very natural and we're just trying to go with each other based on where the argument's leading and not like be thinking of some nice, clever thing to say. So, I mean, I do think that was an interesting thing to point out. I mean, I definitely would probably agree with him. But
I really want to see his opinion on the atheist trope throughout the movie, because obviously the professor is...
Yeah, I'm wondering if they're going to even mention that. Ryan, have you seen God's Not Dead 3?
I have not. I've only seen the first one.
Okay, God's Not Dead 3. 3, though, is much more nuanced. That there is a little bit of a questioning of Christianity in it. When God's Not Dead 1, it's like, no, Christianity is the greatest thing in the world. There's nothing wrong with it.
Really?
There's a big dichotomy between 1 and 3. 2 is very much like 1.
I think that the reason that it got very negative reviews, which it certainly did from critics, I think in part, I would say, is due to anti-Christian bias.
It wasn't because it was a bad movie that it got bad reviews. It was because of the anti-Christian conspiracy around the world.
I have to say, I really resent that kind of a statement because there are a lot of religious movies that I actually do like. I love Ben-Hur. I think it's probably one of my most favorite movies of all time. It's got one of the best film scores of all time as well. That has a lot of religious themes in it. I thought The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. I'm no fan of Gibson, but I thought that was actually a pretty well
I've never
done
seen
film.
it, but I heard it's amazing.
Yeah, it's actually a very well made film, regardless of whether you like the religious stuff or not. Like it's a very well made film.
My favorite movie growing up.
Horribly on its own.
My favorite movie growing up, well, at least one of them, was The Ten Commandments.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's actually a great movie.
It's got another great film score too.
It's similar to like Ben-Hur.
Yeah, so I don't think you can just make this statement of just, oh, this is just anti-Christian bias or what have you, because you have to look at the reasons why someone doesn't think it's a good film first.
Like right now, have you seen the new show Manifest?
I have not.
I've watched it. It's got a lot of Christian themes in it. I still watch it. I like it. It's an enjoyable show.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the differences with at least Passion of the Christ. I don't know the other, 10 Commandments. I'm assuming it's probably pretty similar to the Passion of Christ, but a lot of that sort of looks at it from a historical perspective in a sense, and I'm not even necessarily saying in such a way where everything in the Bible happened, but still, individuals historically speaking have perceived the Bible in certain ways, and it's a story. It's been a group of stories that have been passed down for eons. So I think it's easier to look at that and say, hey, if they're actually trying to have some sort of historical objectivity of the sorts, or one in terms of the narrative, that's a lot different. And I think with God's Not Dead, it depicts it from a contemporary viewpoint, and I think that's why a lot of people are a bit more turned off by it, because I think it's easier to sort of raise red flags with something that you can relate to versus something that you may not be able to relate to as much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to let you know,
that's just my viewpoint.
The Ten Commandments is definitely not from a historical perspective. There's God in it. You don't see God, but you hear him. There's the flood that kills the Egyptians.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Well, I don't even care whether the thing is in a historical perspective per se. I just want it to be an enjoyable film, and as long as I'm not taking the film as like, this is like how something happened. It's just an enjoyable film. Like, cool. Whereas this movie was just cringy all the way through. I mean, there wasn't really much to it that I enjoyed. I wouldn't say the acting was horrible. I wouldn't say it was just the worst acting ever. It was like, on par with like Lifetime Movie Network. But it just, the whole plot of it was terrible. And I'm sure we'll get to some of the points. I don't want to say things way ahead of in the video, but the total plot for me was just not good, and the arguments they used were also not great. But I'm sure we'll get to
terrible. Yeah.
And I think that is a legitimate concern. So propaganda being when a particular form of media is made only as a vehicle to inculcate or to develop or form an ideology or worldview within the audience. And I think that that's a legitimate critique of this film. But I also think that there's some unjustified anti-Christian bias in quote-unquote Hollywood.
Passion of the Christ was the largest money-making for our film until Deadpool.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. R-rated movies usually don't make a lot of money. Passion of the Christ did almost like $800 million or something like that.
It didn't get the worst reviews either.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually got criticized by a lot of Christians because they didn't like the way they went. They thought it was overly Catholic and stuff, but
and gory as fuck.
So on the topic of the coronavirus, if you guys hear my kids in the background, that's because we're all stuck at home right now, and the kids are here. Wife is watching the kids right now, so if you hear kids laughing or playing in the background, just don't worry about it. They're having a good time. So
I just want to say this. I'm a bit of an asshole, but I just find it funny. He's just like, oh, they're having fun. He's like trying to reassure us. Some people don't think they're being slaughtered in the background or something. I just want to bring that up. I'm joking, obviously. That's all I have
to
to
point
say.
that out.
They're not being forced to memorize Bible verses or anything.
Well, that's probably the good time that they were talking about.
Thank God Dad's recording right now, so we're off the hook.
So let me push back on one thing you said, talking about the virtue of it being clean. I would just say, first of all, Schindler's List or Hacksaw Ridge are not clean in the sense that they're appropriate for all ages. So clean is not in and of itself a virtue. It's an audience relative virtue in terms of audience accessibility. So if you do want a film that you can show to a wider audience, then that would be a virtue. But in terms of lacking, sexual content or violence or bad language and so on, that's not in and of itself, I would say, a virtue of a film.
Yeah. So I think that when I said it was clean, I think I even made the caveat. It's like there are a lot of clean movies that are still really, really bad. And so just because it's clean, that's one little positive. What I was trying to do, because I have so many disagreements with the film, or I think the film is bad in a lot of ways, I was trying to find like a few things that are good about it. And I think that it being clean is just like one little thing that does play on that side. Like if we're looking at pros and cons, I think it is something that's on the pro side. Before we get into like the things that we don't like about the film, do you want to start that section? Because I guess you can, because on your blog you take aim at the various stereotypes that they introduce and attack, and how it's really unfortunate that they do that. But there were certain points that I was reading your blog where I was like, I think you went a little bit too far, saying that the stereotypes were so bad. One of them is the stereotype that they build of the Muslim daughter and the father who sort of kicks her out and stuff. So spoiler alert, if you guys haven't watched the movie, it's going to be spoilers throughout this whole thing. So, I mean, it's 2020 now, and it's 2014 when it came out. So if you haven't watched the movie and you're worried about spoilers, there's something wrong with you. But so you, in your blog post, you were saying that the stereotype was really unfortunate. It was like they could have chosen a different Muslim family to showcase in this film, right? I think that was one of the things that you said in your interview. Why don't you go ahead and just sort of explain, and then we'll just have some back and forth. Explain your views on it.
Yeah, so this is not part of the main plot, which we'll certainly get to, but it's a side plot. So there's a Muslim girl named Aisha, and her dad, first of all, tries to force her to wear the hijab in public, and she doesn't want to. So, this headwear for some Muslim women. And then eventually she converts to Christianity, and there's this big explosion, and he kicks her out of the house. And so the picture of Islam is first of all a repressive religion that imposes strictures in terms of what is appropriate apparel to wear in public, and also that they're sort of anti-Christian in their oppression as well. And a couple things I'll just say, and then you can feel free to push back on this. Well, first of all, Muslims generally have a very negative portrayal in the West, even despite some people becoming more aware after 9/11 of anti-Muslim bias. There's still very much negative portrayals. There was a documentary came out about 10 years ago called Real Bad Arabs, spelled REEL, showing how Arabs in particular are often presented, and Muslims as well, within Western cinema. And I mean, I think that here, this is often something that Christians complain about, that the way that we're portrayed in films is unremittingly negative. Yeah. Well, the Muslims here are portrayed in an unremittingly negative way. And I would just say that, for example, when the father wants the daughter to wear a hijab, I mean, he's doing there is trying to enforce a culturally relative standard of modesty, which you can agree with or disagree with, but it's not in kind that different from a Christian parent telling their daughter, you're not going to show your midriff when you go to school. So you could portray that.
Wow, I'm actually so happy he actually said that, because that's one thing I was thinking.
Yeah, same here. It was definitely on my mind. I'm like, I was very uncomfortable with that piece of the movie, because it was clear that they were just trying to do a cheap shot against Islam. Because clearly when you have these atheist baits, usually they're making a case for like deism more than anything. And so it's like, well, we got to show you that like there's something special about us versus these other ones. And so that was like their one little, trying to show that they're a little bit different than at least the Muslims or whatever. And so I'm also glad that this doctor decided to mention, hey, look at some of the things that many Christians even do in terms of like really harsh requirements. I mean, I knew Christians growing up who was like, you couldn't dance, you couldn't read Harry Potter. There was all kinds of things you couldn't do. You couldn't go out on Halloween
before you got married.
Yeah.
What's it called? Jehovah's Witnesses. Magicians are totally off limits and like weird shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, I of course have known Christian parents in the past who, they mentioned the job. I've known many Christian parents, maybe not exactly tied to religion, but I know many that at least tie it into the religion. We of course know that there's a scriptural religion and then there's a sociological one, and I've known many parents that they think it's a sin to have like a belly shirt or something like that. You know what I mean? Or skimpy jeans or some shit. I mean, I'm sure many people have seen that. And so, yeah, that's something I thought that was pretty interesting.
Somebody told me also that they're against, choking one out. I'm not sure about that, but someone told me that.
I want to see Cameron's rebuttal. I really can't wait to see what he says.
Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for.
What I'm also waiting for is, while he's working on stereotypes, I wonder if he even mentions the atheist stereotype.
Yeah, that's also, I was waiting for that too.
I have a feeling because I think they said stereotypes.
Yeah,
so I mean, there's not too many other ones in the movie, oddly enough.
Maybe he's going to say the Christian stereotype. Maybe.
The college freshman stereotype.
The college freshman stereotype.
Okay.
Christian parent very negatively by enforcing their standard of modesty, just like the Muslim. And I think that we have to recognize that we're all on that same spectrum or continuum as parents trying to enforce particular standards. So if the Christian parent resents Hollywood depicting them negatively, they should have some sympathy with the Muslim parent who's trying to enforce a stricture of modesty on their children as well.
Yeah, okay, so I don't disagree with you a whole lot on this, actually. I think that it is unfortunate that, I mean, it's not just the Muslim family that there's these stereotypes that are going on. It's very unrealistic. But I guess that is part of it, because there are families like that, where you have a very traditional parent, father, who would, beat their kid if they found out that they converted to Christianity. So in some respects, I guess that's my only pushback that I would have on that, is that even though they are sort of portraying all Muslims, I guess that's another thing, is that I don't know that they are doing that. I don't know that they are portraying all Muslims in this way. I think.
And there are Christian families that would beat their kids for switching to Islam.
And I want to mention this, him saying that I don't think they're depicting every Muslim this way. Well, the thing is, it doesn't really work that way. I don't think they can just shoehorn like 10,000 Muslim families in there and have like an actual honest like assessment on it.
Yeah.
My problem with these movies and I just hypothesize, I actually don't know who watched this video, but I'm going to make a pretty strong assumption that it's Christians that only subscribe to one viewpoint, one narrative, the traditional fundamental everything, not just with religion, but the political shit, because obviously they had Sean Hannity in this movie. I think they did. That was a different one.
That's Let There Be Light.
Yeah, that is Let There Be Light. My bad. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like when you get these individuals that they don't have sort of this like panoptic sort of desire to find information, they're not consistently looking up statistics. They're not consistently looking up qualitative data on religion and to see how the actual dynamics of the family household works. That's probably going to construct their viewpoint if they haven't spoken to too many Muslims. And some people could look at that and say that's totally fucking stupid. But I do think that a lot of people, they can, garner a worldview based on movies they watch. I think that that's absolutely possible. So that's sort of my issue, is that for a lot of people, that may be their only experience.
Though I could also imagine hearing someone, even one of them, if they heard us saying this, going, oh, well, I bet you wouldn't object to a movie having like a Christian parent taking their gay child out of the house, when clearly not all, Christian parents would do that, and not all do. And I mean, at some point, you're going to have like where a movie's going to choose which direction it's going to go in that sense. Like
I wouldn't make a movie like this though myself. I wouldn't construct
Yeah.
a movie like this. If I were to do it this way, I'd make sure it's in the most objective and possibly the most fucking boring way I could construct it, because I think that's the only way you can give someone an effective sort of concept of things. You know what I mean?
Well,
Viewpoint.
also the Muslim subplot was like so unnecessary. Like it didn't do really anything for the overall plot. It didn't help really in any kind of way.
It seemed like it was shoehorned in just to put a dig on Muslims.
Yes.
Really, the central aspect of that character was, I believe, towards the end when everyone met up at what was it, the concert, or wherever they were at.
Yeah.
I felt like that was like they were literally added as fluff. I felt like they were added as fluff just to like add more characters to like this kind of grouping at this concert, and they kind of were like, okay, what's something that we can shoehorn in? Oh, Islam, Muslims, blah blah blah. They're like pretty much our religious opponent, if you will, here in the West at least. So
Ryan,
I feel like
Ryan, is it the Proud Boys?
I think it's the Newsboys or something like that.
It's something boys, I remember.
Yeah, no, it's not the Proud
McGinnis
Boys. That's
is
a
fucking-
separate thing.
that's McGinnis's fucking gang, the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
Your issue is that they're doing it in a way that's sort of public, and so it's just targeting a stereotype when a lot of Muslim families are not like that at all.
See, yeah, like in my review of the film, I gave two well-known examples. I gave three, but two of them that I gave of Christians portrayed negatively. So one was in the film Carrie, the 1976 original film based on the Stephen King novel. It depicts Sissy Spacek as Carrie, and then her mother is this really oppressive, kind of crazy Christian fundamentalist mother. And then another one in 1991 was Cape Fear. And in Cape Fear, Robert De Niro plays this crazy literally like a psychopath Christian with Bible verses tattooed all over his back. Now, you can, of course, always come back and say, yeah, but there are Christian parents who are like that. There are
But in both of those cases, them being Christian at that time or being so religious was central to the theme of the movie. That was the point, that that person being over-religious made them crazy, as opposed to in this movie, it was just a side story quickly that was like, yeah,
it's like one of the 10 subplots.
I would just add, like, so I think there's even a difference between like Carrie and the Cape Fear that they're using. Like in Carrie's case, clearly, yeah, that was very pivotal to the plot. But in Cape Fear, I honestly never really thought about the religious part of it. Like, it never really had it never felt like it was singled out in a negative way or even singled out in a positive way. It was just kind of there. Like, okay, there are these, verses, and he liked to quote stuff, but like his problem wasn't religion per se.
Yes.
I mean, it was the lawyer not standing up for him, and then now he's seeking his revenge.
And
so
I haven't seen any of those, but I think obviously the most off-putting thing about it was that the daughter, she proselytized. I think that was probably the worst part, and I don't know if there's any of that in the movies that you guys are talking about.
Alex,
I actually don't know anything
I
about
have
them.
one question for you, Alex. Have you seen any movies?
Pretty much nothing. I try to distance myself from like all the religious movies, I guess.
Well, these aren't even religious movies. Carrie wasn't a religious movie.
Again, I haven't fucking seen it. I don't know.
Ryan, what are you gonna do with this guy? Fuck.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Spank me.
I guess I'll pray for him since nothing will happen. So
What? Oh, you didn't see? Cameron's got a video going up, I think, tomorrow on how prayer works.
Yeah, we'll have to react to that one. That should be good.
it's just going to be a second clip of a coin flipping.
No, it's probably going to be like 16-headed die or something like that. It's got to be number one.
those who have Bible verses tattooed on their back. Fair enough. But those portrayals are also part of a wider narrative of Hollywood always portraying Christians negatively, and that's one of the reasons that you kind of get irritated by them. And I would say, well, this is actually part of a wider trend within Christian subculture portraying Muslims negatively, and that's one of the reasons that I find it worrisome. I just also say that the fact that the father, he doesn't respond well to the daughter's conversion by any means, but also you can imagine Christian parents not responding particularly well to their children converting to Islam. And in fact, there are at least a few Christian parents that might physically abuse their children as well.
Wow.
So we can always kind of come back on that, but I just think it's an uncharitable portrayal of Muslims.
Yeah, so one of the things you said was that when it comes to Christians or evangelicals more broadly, is that they sort of tend to, you didn't say the word caricature, but they target Muslims, they target the sort of worst forms of Islam in their movies and in their articles, whatever they do. And I guess I would just need to see some evidence of that. Like, what reason do you think, or what's your argument that most evangelicals are targeting Muslims in this like sort of really bad way, or portraying them as really in really a real negative light?
Does he not listen to like Christian apologists like
Apparently
Kent
not.
Hovind, Ken Ham, Ray Comfort? They all talk fucking negative about Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, even a lot of like radical traditionalists, Catholics tend to be pretty anti-Islam. Like they almost see it as, there needs to be another crusade in some cases against them. So it's pretty widespread.
I mean, it's pretty far. Well, in the United States, I don't know if Europe is like this, but the right tends to be Christian, and the right tends to be anti-Muslim.
Well, I wouldn't doubt it, especially because most Christians are very, very strict monotheists. They're not really henotheistic. So yeah, I think so. I'm very surprised that Cameron's not aware of all Islamophobic hate crimes that exist and whatnot. That's something that kind of surprises me.
I think Cameron still has a
Not hard to
very
find.
rosy, beautiful picture of Christianity.
Yeah.
There's like almost nothing wrong with it.
Probably, yeah.
This
I wouldn't
other-
doubt it, at least.
The doctor here seems like he's got a more nuanced view of Christianity so far.
I'm fucking surprised. I thought they're gonna be deep throwing each other with yes, yes, yes. Oh, right.
That's how almost all his
I'm surprised.
almost all his
Yeah.
other guests, they're really sucking each other down.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them, yeah. When he's not hosting a debate or whatever, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a positive portrayal of Muslims for in Christian media. Post 9/11, I think that there's certainly the standard response I think has been negative. There's been a lot of fear of Muslims. So we actually at our church about a year ago, we hosted a dialogue night that I moderated between a Christian imam, not an imam, Christian imam. Sorry, a Muslim who's a professor. He's a Persian background, and then a Christian professor, and they had a dialogue, and I moderated that. And we had Muslims and Christians together in the congregation, but that kind of thing doesn't happen that often. I think that there is often a lot of fear. So I'm not committed to providing a bunch of data statistically as to how Muslims are portrayed within Christian subculture, but I don't think generally it's positive. I think generally Christians view Islam.
All right, so I wanted to mention something that did dawn on me. I know I mentioned Sean Hannity. I'm getting my movies confused, but I do remember in Let There Be Light, and I don't know if Cameron saw Let There Be Light. I have no clue. I don't know if he's already reacted to it. I have no
they
clue.
talk bad about Muslims and that. Yeah.
Yeah, they do, because I remember Sean Hannity. I don't know if they reference Muslims explicitly, but I think at the very least it's very implicit, because I remember him talking about like cutting people's heads off and
they're talking about
infidels'
ISIS.
heads off or something. I want to say he said something like that.
Yeah, they're like ISIS. What right does ISIS have for cutting people's heads off?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So they did pretty much mention it, even though ISIS is, not technically representative of Islam. That's not necessarily what he was implying, but I think that point kind of goes to show that that it's not even too far distance from just this movie. Gone out and actually presented their movies in an Islamophobic way that's transcended God is not dead. So it's not like they just did this once and they fucked up and they realized it. Sean Hannity of all people, very important person, need I remind you. This isn't just some sort of random fucking homeless motherfucker on the side of the street saying Islam's bad. You have a very, very powerful endorsement of doing this with Islam. So I think that's a shining example. If he hasn't seen the movie, then fair enough. But that right there is just a singular example that is related to this movie, because I believe it's the same people that made God Is Not Dead that made.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Didn't Kevin Sorbo produce it or something? Something like that.
Something like that. But PureFlix is one of the largest Christian producers. I think actually
Could be
might
largest.
be the largest.
It probably is the largest. I don't know. I can't name anything else, so I wouldn't be surprised if it is.
I did want to say I actually like the way the doctor put it a few moments ago, where he was like, almost like, can you think of a positive depiction in the last, that almost makes it even more clear, because like I can't think of a positive depiction. Either they're going to
Nor can I.
at all, or they're going to have a negative one.
Well, the only one I have is from individuals that are actually trying to, they're trying to sympathize with that community. So
Sure.
outside of that, though, no, I can't refer to anything that is somewhere in right-wing media that does look at them in a positive light. I'm not going to say it's not out there. It easily could be, and I just could be ignorant of it. But
Probably.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's always a possibility, but I haven't seen anything. How about you, Dan? Have you seen anything
No,
like
I
that?
haven't either. So you're in the clear for now.
Okay, good.
I know that's what you needed.
Yes, I did need that.
Self-actualization.
As long as I'm ahead of Cameron in this video, that's successful in my eyes. That's where my bar stands. Everything
That's a pretty
above
fucking low
Cameron.
bar.
Hey man. I thought that this theologian guy or whatever he is, I thought he was right around that bar, but he's clearing it pretty good. So
Far, yeah.
As an oppressive religion, whereas Islam and Christianity historically are not that different. Christianity only began to have.
Holy fuck!
Jesus God!
I say that often. Like, I've never heard a Christian say that.
Maybe we need to start reacting to shit with this guy literally with us. I think we need to invite him on here.
Can someone say what he said, because it blipped out for me? I didn't hear the full sentence.
Yeah. I'll rewind it because you got to hear it from him.
I think generally Christians view Islam as an oppressive religion, whereas Islam and Christianity historically are not that different. Christianity only began to have a concept.
Christianity and Islam are not that different.
Yeah, I got it.
Holy shit! Have you ever heard a Christian say that?
Spectacular.
That's kind of surprising. I'm wondering to see how Cameron responds to that.
In the West of religious toleration in the 17th century, and before then we were much like many Muslim nations are now. So it's somewhat of an incidental modern development that Christianity has a sense of religious toleration.
Yeah, I guess I would just want to look more into that, because I'm not familiar with how most Christians in media and art portray Muslims. I mean, a lot of what a conservative would say is that the liberal left is always portraying Islam and Muslim in a positive light, and so it's not necessarily a bad thing that you can sort of show this other side of Islam. I'm not saying that that's a good argument. That's what I'm saying. I just think that I guess that's how a conservative could respond. But I think that there's, to your point, and to show some agreement here, throughout the film, and just going beyond the sort of the Muslim part of the film, which again is like why was that even in the film in the first place? Like, it served relatively no purpose at all. And like the last part of the film, she like found Josh. He was at the Newsboys concert, which was that's one of my first points, is that the movie was like so cheesy. It was so cheesy. Mm-hmm. And the last part, the concert with Newsboys, was like the pinnacle of cheesiness. But like, she shows up and she's like, wow, standing behind Josh, the main character protagonist of the film, standing behind him. And like, that's her whole purpose, is to like stand behind him and notice him. And we're supposed to be left with like this, maybe they're going to wind up together. The whole story served no purpose in this film other than just to sort of like bash this brand of I don't know. So to your point, to show some agreement here, I think that it is kind of unfortunate when the film is just sort of rife with stereotypes. That's the thing that you point out in your blog post. And that's the thing that one of the things that I agree with is that all this film does is look at like the worst stereotypes of everybody: atheist professors, liberal bloggers, or people who are sort of opposed to evangelicals or conservatives. It just like looks at them in the most uncharitable, the worst light possible. And I guess maybe the way that they would respond to that is by saying, well, look, we were making a film. We had to make it somewhat interesting. And so the way that we had to do that was to sort of go to the extremes. Just like when you're telling any sort of cinematic story, you've got to make it interesting and take some creative liberties in order to make the film interesting. So maybe that's the way that they would respond to that.
I do believe, that the critique you make, that whole subplot, it doesn't really figure, it doesn't serve the main plot, except to the point where she is kind of offered up as a replacement for the blonde girlfriend at the beginning, who tries to draw him away in an embodiment of the lust of flesh, the eyes, and the pride of life from First John 2. Right? She's sort of the first blonde girlfriend's like, no, don't go up against the atheist philosophy professor. We have a life we're planning together, and Josh will not be deterred like in Pilgrim's Progress. And so he shunts her off to the side and challenges the atheist philosophy professor. And then this new
which,
Christian
by the way, like
convert
what
his gift. So
why didn't Josh just be like, hey, look, the Reverend told me to look at these scriptures, and that's why I'm wanting to do this, because Jesus said, if you're ashamed of me before other people, then I'm going to be ashamed of you before my Father. Like, why didn't he just tell her the reasoning? Like, that's one of the things that I really dislike about the film. These sort of very unrealistic dialogues that restrict, like how...
Maybe because some people don't rule their whole life on the Bible?
Probably not.
Yeah, he's a Christian, so he probably does.
I mean, they probably, the way this movie could have gone, it was just like I don't know who the fuck, again, I don't know who the fuck made this film. Again, I know that Sorbo had something to do with it, but someone probably just threw money at someone else that probably didn't know too much about the Christian faith.
I think from now on, don't call him Sorbo. Call him Hercules.
Okay, fine, I'll call him Hercules then. Yeah, I don't know all the logistics of everything, but yeah, I feel like someone just like fucking shit out a fucking wad of dollar bills and just like, here, make a Christian movie, and someone was like, oh, okay, we'll do it, and and maybe the best thing they had was
call Hercules now. They shit out the money. Call Hercules now to make this movie.
Normal dialogue would take place. Like, you'd obviously tell your girlfriend, hey, look, I was convinced of this. I was convinced to go talk to him because he told me to look at these scriptures, and yeah, I felt convicted. And so that's why I'm going to go do this, because I don't... Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, it's stilted. I mean, I mentioned the idea of propaganda at the beginning, and I do think that's a legitimate critique of the film. So the film, the characters, the plot line, I think that they serve to buoy up confidence among evangelical conservatives and offer criticisms those conservatives will like for outgroups relative to the evangelical Christian community. And so stuff like verisimilitude, or in other words, the reality of the dialogue, how would really people talk, that's considered secondary to the real point, which is to give these cardboard character cutouts. I mean, the whole name, Josh Wheaton, Joshua, Jesus, and then Wheaton is, I think, a reference to Wheaton College, sort of the embodiment of evangelical Christian intellectual conviction or something. So it's kind of very a bald symbol, I think. It's not a lot of subtlety in this film.
All right, well, let me move on to some of my, unless you have anything else to add, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of list some of the biggest issues that I see with the film.
Sure.
And then get your comments on them. So like I mentioned, I think it's really cheesy. It was a really cheesy film. Like, many of the scenes were overly dramatic. The one scene where the leftist blogger is with her boyfriend, who's like maybe a Wall Street guy, I don't know. But they're like, she has cancer. She goes to dinner with the guy, and she's like, look, I have cancer. And then he's like, this is really bad timing for me. It's like that. I don't know.
Not a lot of people really are going to be that completely psychopathic, right? Like yeah. That is, he has no conviction there. And I mean,
I think they're starting to critique that atheist caricature now, which is nice. But we'll see. That was like, again, another side thing. I'm curious to see what they have to say about the actual professor, who the whole things based around.
Yeah, who's not really an atheist.
Yeah, I really do want to see if they bring that point up.
It's like a secular atheistic perspective as well. So there's a kind of a suggestion here where you have this kind of perspective and you have no compassion for this female. It's not a very charitable picture.
Yeah, well, then there's another film, or there's another scene in the film where the reverend and like the missionary is there, and he like picks him up from the airport, and then they have the God is good all the time thing, and they do that a couple times throughout the film. That's super cheesy. The last debate scene with the professor was also terrible in terms of how cheesy it was. He's like, "Why do you hate God?" And the professor's like, doesn't know what to do. It's just so cheesy. The newsboy scene at the end was super painful to watch, like the leftist blogger go in there and get saved. Really cheesy. My second
centerpiece of the film is that, of course, the atheist philosophy professor demands that every student write "God is dead" in the philosophy class on a piece of paper on the first day of class.
and sign it.
And sign it, which, yeah, that happens all the time in university. Of course, that's what fundamentalists think happens in university often, so it's not going to make them feel much better. And so then Josh refuses to sign it, and the atheist philosophy professor challenges him to a duel to the death, right? So 3 classes in a row, Josh gets to defend. In the first week of the first semester of his education as an undergraduate, he's going to go up against his philosophy professor. And
I don't know about any of you guys if you've ever taken any philosophy courses.
I've taken a few.
In uni, I'm sure. I assume you guys have.
Yeah, I've taken one.
I've never had, when this topic comes up, and really any topic for that matter, but especially this topic since it's such a hot-seated one, never had a philosophy professor even tell us what they believe.
Yeah.
From my experience, they just bring up the points and they let the students do the thinking, come to the decisions. And if a student does give an argument that is commonplace, they may give an argument back at that. They say is recurrent. They'll say, it's not my position, but this is the position that's out there, to see how people will kind of adjust to whatever is said. But I mean, I'm not going to say that there's no philosophy professors out there that aren't completely vocal about their viewpoints. Of course, there's many that are, they're so like intertwined into media and what have you that it's kind of hard not to know that. But that was like so far out there, I think.
Well, the funny thing is actually, this movie came out the semester that I took my intro philosophy course in State University, and my final paper. So I was still a theist at this point. My final paper was basically the case for like defending the ability to believe in God, but it was from like an agnostic theist standpoint. So I pretty much was like, yeah, a lot of these arguments aren't like rock solid or good and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, but I still kind of more or less defended like a case for still like it being reasonable to believe in a God or whatever. I got like 100 on that paper, or pretty darn close to, I think maybe a 98. And the professor and the 2 TAs, they were all atheists to my knowledge. So clearly not everywhere there's this huge bias where, oh, the professors are just going to side against you or something. It's about what was the quality of what you argued, not, oh, you argued some position I don't like.
Yeah, that's usually shit that you'll find in like a soft sciences class, from my experience. It's a lot more dogmatic. Kind of the point of philosophy is to approach it in a non-dogmatic way. So there's people that could feel the complete opposite about that. So yeah.
Culminates in the third session with Josh asking that question, why do you hate God, like 3 times? And finally the philosophy professor melts down and says he hates God because God didn't heal his mother. So here's a message. It's cheesy, yes, but I think at a more fundamental level, just the way that it portrays atheists as completely negative and opposed to God, and that at some level, Professor Radisson really does believe God exists, but he will not submit to God. And so this is what I called in one of my books the rebellion thesis, that the claim that atheists at some level really do believe God exists, and atheism is only a rationalization for the fact that they refuse to submit to God. And Josh, this 18-year-old student, unveils the moral hollowness of his atheism by like the middle of September. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. And I can't imagine Christians being portrayed with such an uncharitable picture in a film, how they would react. So,
right. I guess that gets to my third point. My third point is that it's extremely unrealistic, and we've already talked about some of the things that are unrealistic about it. I mean, even the guy and yeah, like the way that they portray the atheist professor, like that was one of my biggest gripes, is that an atheist professor is not going to get worked up over the things that this person was saying. Like you have to be really out of touch with what atheist philosophers actually say and what they actually think in order to think that an atheist professor, first of all, doesn't even like give an argument or can't defend atheism from something like the problem of evil. It was just a really bad portrayal of a philosophy professor. One of the other things, and this is just a little side point, is that Richard Dawkins is one of the first people that he names on his like whiteboard of philosophers who are atheists. I thought that was really strange. Like, why would they have an atheist philosopher list Richard Dawkins as a philosopher? It like the whole movie sort of seems like it was written from the not from the perspective of, but the whole movie seems like it was.
Yeah, I mean, all he really mentioned was Dawkins. I think that's the only guy he ever mentions. Do you remember, Ryan?
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I'd have to rewatch it. It's been a while, but I do remember Dawkins was on the list, and Dawkins isn't even a philosopher, so it's like, what?
He's a fucking biologist.
Yeah, he's like, oh, Richard Dawkins disagree with you, and like he kept bringing that up pretty often.
I mean, again, obviously, it's just people like tacking on to, what atheist celebrities are out there, and Richard Dawkins is probably one of the first. He may be honestly the most popular.
Yeah.
Well, they say that this movie had like expert theologians work on it, like to make sure it was good and stuff. It's like, what theologians did they get? I mean, they should have had this doctor, doing the vetting.
Maybe it'd actually be a decent movie, or it just would have been scrapped altogether.
You really could make a decent movie around like debates like this.
Yeah.
But it probably wouldn't be in like the kind of format that they did. And honestly, like a legit movie that did it right would end with the atheist still being an atheist, the Christian still being a Christian, but now they're like good friends and like they still do debates, on other topics. Like that's the more realistic portrayal of what happens.
Like they understand each other's position better.
Right.
Written by Josh, like someone who's like a freshman college student who read like maybe 2 books on apologetics and was just like, I now have everything that I need in order to write up this fanciful movie about me going and like making an atheist professor look bad in his own class. It just, that's how the movie kind of came across to me. It was written by someone who's very just aware of apologetics at a very, very superficial level and writing a whole story around that minute knowledge that he has. I don't know.
Yeah. Like the second session, the second of their duels, focuses in large part, as I recall, on macro evolution. So, I mean, my first problem with that is there are many. I mean, this has been a conversation.
He talks about he doesn't do macro evolution. What he does is he mentions the Cambrian explosion. He doesn't use that terminology.
Yeah.
I actually listened to each part individually because I wanted to see what I wanted to say about each one of them. The first session, I'll just go, I'll do a quick overview. The first session was on the beginning of the universe. And then at the end of that one, the atheist professor was like, oh, here's this Hawking quote about gravity being able to produce a universe. What are you going to do with that? And he didn't have an answer. And so in the second one, he magically found John Lennox, who had like this perfect quote for him to refute Hawking. And then the second part of that was talking about the Cambridge explosion and how life just sort of exploded onto the scene in evolutionary terms. And then the last one was on the problem of evil.
Yeah. Okay, so this idea that with respect to the Cambrian explosion, this is of course the background is that evolution is inconsistent with Christian conviction, which is simply false. So there are Christians who reject theistic evolution. There are Christians who accept it. The Catholic Church has taken a position of officially recognizing it as a legitimate position since the 1950s. Evangelicals with Francis Collins and Biologos have been leading the dialogue in developing theistic evolutionary models within an evangelical Christian context. So I don't think that we do ourselves any favors, because when you focus on something like the Cambrian explosion and try to argue that that's somehow inconsistent with or falsifies a theory of common descent or of evolutionary origins, what you do is perpetuate the warfare model of science and theology. And then the fact that Josh, the philosophy student's first semester, second week.
I've thought about it often, and while I think a lot of Christians don't believe there's any conflict, the more I think about it, the more I think there's a huge conflict between evolution and religion, in the sense that if evolution is true, Adam and Eve is totally out the window. And if Adam and Eve is totally out the window, then original sin's out the window. If original sin's out the window, there's no reason for Jesus to come back.
Well, I've heard some Orthodox Christians, so that's Eastern Orthodox Christians, talk about like the concept of like ancestral sin rather than original sin. And one of them was like, well, the story of like Adam and Eve does not have to be a literal story, kind of like the Jonah and the whale story or any like that kind of stuff. They don't have to be viewed as literal stories. They're like just kind of, I don't know, basics of things starting. I don't even get that really, because it doesn't really help you much to just say, oh, someone like basically snapped their fingers to start everything. But it was not supposed to be a literal story anyway. It's not a big deal that like there's not this kind of Adam and Eve original sin kind of take. Rather, ancestral sin would be like kind of this idea of, at least the people who I talked to. Now others may have a different take, but the people I talked to, they were like, ancestral sin is like the totality of all of our sins over time, and that's why Jesus had to do it, is because we basically would have no way of coming back from all of our sinning if it wasn't for that. I don't think it's still like great by any stretch of the imagination.
But they have an answer.
Yeah, they still have an answer.
They have an answer for everything.
There's plenty of mental gymnastics that you can employ. But also if you're like, well, what did like the vast majority of Christians believe over a long period of time? And if your answer is not winning out there, you have to go like, well, why didn't this guy make things clear? Like why do we have to have all this mental gymnastics, piecing stuff together, much after the fact, for this to be any bit reasonable. I mean, I remember there was an argument I had with someone like 2 or 3 years ago, and I got accused of not looking at the theistic arguments post 1970s. And I said to myself, if we had to wait until after the 1970s to get good arguments, that doesn't bode well for your position. It's like
I say
it puts the brunt on humans, if anything. You know what I mean? To try and figure that shit out. Yeah, and I thought the point of the Bible is to be this strong testament of God's will, and it's a demonstration of His ethics and all those other things, and it really does put the wrench in it if humans have to do all the legwork.
I have an argument that I often say about that's similar to something like Matt Dillahunty says, where really, if you have an all-knowing, all-powerful God, and He wants everybody to know X, Y, and Z, He knows how to make sure that everybody knows X, Y, and Z exactly how He wants it. Then why is there so much confusion?
Is that the point that he brings up, that also God could have wanted to deceive people? I believe he also brings that up. I'm not saying like he says that. It's like one of the options. It's one of the options to that, I believe.
Who brings that up?
If God wants you to deceive you, then that could be an explanation. But he's a dickhead if he does, typical Dillahunty stuff.
Well, one of the responses I've seen in a lot of these debates, and I have had in my own kind of debates, is someone will say, well, who are you, this meek little human, to decide how that the plan's much bigger than you, and it's so incomprehensible, and yada yada yada. And then there's also pair that with the Molinism, that take on things. William Lane Craig's been kind of a big revival of that, where it's like, well, God's almost like this utilitarian maximizer who like he picks out of all possible universes, the universe where with all us feeble humans, the best outcome comes out of it. And it's like every justification comes down to this just, well, with fallible, beaten down humans, like this was the best we could do. That's basically what you get.
Along those lines, it's funny because even though he's supposed to be all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, many of the arguments they have to solve a lot of the problems limits God's power. If you're saying God has to do this specific universe...
I think a flawed God, oddly enough, is less flawed, ironically.
Like I've said, I think the God of the Bible, impossible. He doesn't exist. For him, I'm a strong atheist. A God existing that's maximally powerful as opposed to all-powerful, yeah, sure. But the God of the Bible? No way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. The Bible's a big fucking book.
But that's the problem.
So much
the God of the Bible there's too many contradictions.
No, I hear you.
That's why they have to come up with so many exceptions and things like that to overcome all the problems
Unless if you adhere to the narrative, I don't think I've seen too many Christians say this, but they say that the Bible has been taken out of context so much that it's such a bastardized version, and the original, the manuscripts. Oh, those are the good ones. Those are the good ones. Or some may even say like, oh, they're in the ether. There is this magical manuscript we haven't even found yet, and that's the one.
So then if the God of what should be in the Bible is very different than what we find in the Bible,
right?
It's almost like a different God.
Another interesting thing is that, like within seminaries, it's not controversial that, and even in fact, a Christian friend of mine also had pointed this out on my page not long ago. That hey, in seminary, it's not that controversial that the Torah there is polytheism in that.
Yep.
Like multiple gods, right? And that's a part of the Abrahamic tradition. And then suddenly it's like, well, that no more of that. Like now it's just me,
Like even in the Moses story.
Well, doesn't it mention in the Old Testament that God says he's like better than every other god?
Yeah. Well,
that sort of concedes that there's other gods.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you're ascribing characteristics of something, it's almost as if you're speaking as if it exists. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, in Exodus, he talks about that. He's like, now let's see your God do this.
Yeah, doesn't he speak about Egyptian gods, I believe?
Yeah, that's...
I believe he actually references Egyptian gods.
Is going to be able to provide an informed critique of the reigning paradigm in the biological sciences. It's hubristic. It's not humble, and it's silly, frankly. And he's setting himself up to get nailed, because if a biology professor ever walked in that classroom, he would wipe the floor with Josh, and then Josh might very well face a crisis of faith because he bought into this warfare model. So my idea is not to sell evolution on somebody who's not interested in it. It's simply to say it shouldn't be a ground for causing your faith to stumble, as if you've got to defeat it in order to have a sustainable Christian faith.
Yeah, so this is my seventh. I have 7 big issues with the film, and so my 7th one is that the apologetics in it is really weak. And so the fact that they focus on the Cambrian explosion, and I think I said it wrong earlier. I think I may have said Cambridge explosion. The Cambrian explosion the Cambrian explosion that they focused on in the film, I think was a big mistake. There's so many different things that you could do. And I also think that the way that they addressed the problem of evil in the 3rd session was also just really bad and really superficial. And there's a few other things that I have wrong that are going to sort of fall under that category, or under a different category with the film, that'll be able to touch on some of those things. But yeah, I agree on the point about evolution, is that like if that's where you're going to stake your flag, I think that's the wrong place to do it. It can lead, like you said, if he were in a situation where a biology professor instead of an atheist professor, which it could have been an atheist professor that again wasn't just a complete moron, and that knew how to defend atheism, and maybe was a little bit more interested in science, and so would have known how to respond to this. I also thought one of the things that was really silly to me in the second lecture that he gave was the fact that he pointed out that Stephen Hawking said philosophy is dead. And like, why wouldn't the atheist professor be aware of that? Like, if he was quoting Hawking earlier, why wouldn't he be aware of the fact that he said that? It just, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, I think there are just so many things in terms of the implausibility of the world that is presented in this film
Yep.
that we could go on for some length. I mean, you're right, certainly as well, on like the problem of evil. It was a very trite a treatment with respect to freedom of the will. I mean, the problem of evil is a huge issue. Now, I do think as a Christian, there are intellectually satisfactory, for me, reasons to rebut the problem, but I think for many others, it is a serious intellectual challenge. And I think the difference between propaganda or indoctrination and education is that propaganda or indoctrination gives you a sense that we've got this settled, that we've kind of got it all figured out. But education gives you some degree of proper confidence, but also lets you have some degree of some of the questions that still need to be addressed and an open mind of inquiry to pursue those answers. And I think the person who watches this film is more likely to come away with a sense of self-satisfaction that we've kind of got it all figured out.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I had wrong with the film. One of my biggest issues was the fact that it sort of downplays the problem of evil. They just say that it's like an emotional issue. That's basically what they try to get out of the professor, like having an emotional reaction. I hate God, or I don't even, that may have been exactly what he said, but I don't know. But yeah, I think it's really unfortunate to sort of downplay the problem of evil in that way. And they took like the very traditional approach, which is just that it again reveals to me that this person, whoever wrote the film, or maybe if it was a group of people that wrote it, they all have a sort of superficial awareness of apologetics, because what they do in the third one is they introduce the problem of evil. He says, oh, well, free will can explain everything. And then he says, oh, well, as an atheist, you don't believe in moral absolutes. And I was thinking, again, like most professors, most ethicists are moral realists. Most of them do believe that moral absolutes are real. So to just like assume that this atheist professor is going to reject objective morality, I think just sort of betrays a level of ignorance about apologetics and about just the field of philosophy, religion, philosophy, and atheist professors more generally. It's so bad in so many different ways. But it is, it's going back to the point about they portray it as an emotional issue, and it is an intellectual problem that Christians and theists need to deal with seriously. And it's not something that we need to give the impression to other people that it's just something so easy, so simple to figure out. It's just the problem of evil is we can just hand wave it away. Just talk about, just easily transition into an argument from morality, and that's the way out of this problem. I think that that's not, it's a way of not dealing seriously with the problem and sort of just shooing it away. And I think that we have enough of that in our culture, and especially between like Christians and atheists and the whole debate that goes on between the two. There's enough of hand waving away arguments and hand waving stuff away. Like if you're going to hand wave away the argument from contingency or the Kalam cosmological argument, but then if you're going to complain about atheists doing that to those arguments, and then you're going to do it to the problem of evil, I think it's being hypocritical. You've got to deal seriously on both sides with everything.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that they portray it that way. It's just like this really easy thing, and that's why the atheist professor is doing this, is because, he just had an emotional experience when he was 12 years old, and so that's why he's an atheist. And so once we understand that, then we can see what motivates him. And it's the same thing that a lot of atheists do to Christians.
And of course, we would be certainly in tune with that if it did happen to us. And so, yeah, it's a total violation of the golden rule, I think, to sort of indulge in these kinds of cardboard stereotypes when we would resent them to us. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing Josh says to Professor Radisson, when Professor Radisson sort of talks about answers the question, why do you hate God? And then because of the loss of his mother, and then in kind of, I think, a smug way, Josh says, well, how can you hate someone that doesn't exist? I think that there's a word here to be said for the anti-theist. So anti-theism, for those who don't know, is the idea not simply of believing God doesn't exist, but being against the existence of God or opposed to the existence of God. And there are types of anti-theism that are indefensible, but I don't think that the position Dr. Radisson is in here to steelman rather than strawman his position. I don't think that he's being incoherent or inconsistent.
He's not an anti-theist, he's a misotheist. A misotheist hates God and believes in him. An anti-theist doesn't believe in God, but is against religion or God.
or at least on a given version, is
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, that guy's a jackass,
I think that if to put it this way, like if an atheist would believe God doesn't exist, but they would also believe if God did exist, then they would be angry at God for having allowed the kind of evil that exists in the world. So it's a sort of counterfactual position. Well, yeah, if God does exist, then I'd be very angry at God for allowing this. So I think that we can readily understand Dr. Radisson's anger at God for allowing his mother.
I also want to clarify, I don't think it's necessarily infeasible to believe in a God and hate them at the same time. Just wanted to throw that out there.
That's what a mesotheist is.
Yeah, no, I mean like the actual viewpoint of it all, though, not just the God, but do you know what I'm saying?
Sure, you could imagine a God existing, and this is the universe that
Oh,
it
you would hate him
crafted.
if he existed.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the existence. Like you hate the fact that they exist, not necessarily like. I guess you could be a mesotheist and an antitheist, but I guess what I'm saying is like you wish that they didn't exist, but you still believe in them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, and then also like I've seen like anarchistic atheists who are that way. Like they're like, I don't want some authority like this existing.
Yeah. I guess you could look at it that way. So I wanted to clarify that. But I think that most people that identify as anti-theists are probably going to be of the atheistic flavor. But I do think it is feasible. How prevalent are those individuals? Probably they're very scant, if they even exist. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, and I mean honestly, within the Christian tradition, I would imagine their take would be that Satan is convinced that God exists, but would probably rather him not, right?
To die. As counterfactually, well, if there is a God who allowed my mother to die, I'm going to be angry at that God. I can understand where he's coming from, and I think that we have to recognize, in fact, that if you go through Scripture, go through the Psalms or Job or other texts, that very much the protest against God for allowing particular things is a part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I think that there's something to be said for that kind of anger at God allowing certain things to happen. What we would need to do is to take that in a redemptive direction rather than just sort of censure Dr. Radisson as being this implacable moral rebel for having that resistance against God in the first place.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be this like real big mic drop moment for Josh. It's like, well, why do you hate God if you don't think that he exists? And like you can just imagine him just dropping a mic and just walking off. And it's so silly. I mean, I guess that even adds more to the cheesiness of the film and the unrealistic part of it. So here's probably one of my biggest gripes with the film. It is that it encourages students to challenge their professors, I think, in a lot of ways, because it sort of portrays this like.
I think students should challenge their professors.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're all going to agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's just saying he's got the typical "you need to respect your authority figures," and I feel like he's
Let's
gonna.
hear what the rest he's gonna say though. So
Yeah. I don't want to assume.
Really fanciful scenario where the student, and like you said, in literally like 3 weeks, was able to learn enough information in order to like best and make his atheist philosophy professor, look like a complete moron in his class. It paints a real unrealistic picture that it can be very, very detrimental for students that are in this.
I would say the way he did it.
He deserved it.
Well,
I'm not saying that the execution was
The professor
great.
definitely deserved it, but Josh wasn't very.
Yeah, the execution was poor, but
They were both sides were wrong.
But I mean, if I had a professor like that, again, I've never had one like that as it was depicted in the movie, but I mean, I've had professors that they'll come forth and they'll put forth false information.
Sure.
And I'll correct them over it. And some of my professors, they're not like cool with it. They're not like, oh, thank you, I love being wrong. Some of them you can kind of tell, like they'll be like, oh, how do you know this? How do you know that? Or they're like, oh, I'll have to see that. Show me the study on this or that. But yeah, I don't know.
I have a story for another time. I was almost kicked out of college because I almost got into a big fight with a professor.
Oh, I definitely need to hear that.
Another time.
Okay.
Daniel's not dead.
And it can give them this idea, oh, well, yeah, if this guy, if Josh can do it, and in the movie, he's portrayed as like giving all of these arguments that have no responses, and like it really catches the professor off guard. I think it gives a really, I want to use these terms like magical, fanciful. It gives a really unrealistic picture of a scenario like this. So what I want to say, in line with someone like Greg Kokel, who says, look, don't launch a frontal attack on a superior force. And that's exactly what this guy did. Was he like launched this attack on this atheist professor. And so in a lot of ways, it was a bad thing for him to do. And it's a bad thing for other students to do, is to like do something like this, where you're trying to convince him or like break down his motivations for atheism, whatever. I think that that's a really unwise thing for students to do in a situation like this. So what you can do, it doesn't mean that you just have to like stop. What you can do is instead have like a personal, private conversation with the guy and just be like, hey, look, give me your reasons, give me your arguments, why you think that this view is true. I want to take those with me. I want to study these a bit more. I want to.
All right. So, I may like, again, I probably should let him finish, but I just wanted to throw this out there. I think that there's times where sure, it's probably A-okay to talk to teachers in private, professors, instructors, whatever. But I think there's times where they need to be called out in front of the class. Because there's times where they may get information wrong because, they're not infallible. And that should be broadcasted out there. Because I think if there is a student that does know proper information, the other students have a right to that information. And I personally, I think that's part of the reason, why college and university is so great, is that you're not just open to the individual that's for the most part spearheading the class. You're open to everyone else that may know something about the topic. And so, that to me, that's a great thing about it. So yeah, I don't think I'm really not a proponent of saying things in private. I think if someone says something wrong and you feel pretty confident about it, whatever that may be, because again, I'm not saying that all students are jackasses. There could be a jackass student that thinks they know everything they fucking don't. Because if it's just said in private, then that professor may not correct themselves, and that in turn may not put the students in a position to know more information.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. I mean, it would really come down to my confidence level that this professor would make an open like critique of what they had said and be like, hey guys, in that last class I had said such. Someone brought it to my attention that I was incorrect, and I've had professors do that, by the way. But there are some that won't, and so it really would depend on what I know about that given professor.
Right.
About do I really think it's necessary to put the class in reverse for a moment so that we could talk about some side issue. But if I was not confident that the professor would be willing to correct themselves, then I would raise my hand and go, hey, you mentioned this, but actually that's not the case because of XYZ reasons. And I try to be as respectful as possible about it, of course. But I wouldn't be trying to quote unquote call them out and win points as like the smart person. I would only be doing it if I thought, ooh, wow, this is a great disservice to that view or that person, and it needs to be, dealt with in the moment.
You wouldn't take your knives and slap them across the face?
Yeah, I actually didn't think that like Josh in the movie came off as like a supremo dick. Like I didn't like I don't know if that's like what Cameron's getting at, that he was kind of a dick for calling him out. Like to me, that was kind of the right thing to do. Again, I'm not saying the execution was great. I love Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that, but I didn't really get that impression if that's where Cameron's coming from.
Yeah, I didn't either. I didn't think the character was that off-putting in that sense. I mean, it was understandable that well, first of all, his grade was depending on it, right? Because it was kind of like,
good point.
Either you write down that God's there or whatever, or you don't. If you don't, you're going to get screwed. He clearly did not want to get screwed, but he also didn't want to go against his views, which I understand that. And so now he goes to professor, and now it's kind of like, well, you're going to have to do this debate with me now. And so he kind of was put in a corner where, okay, he's not prepared for the debate. He's not going to ever probably be prepared for the debate, at least not in that semester. And so he's kind of got to do it the best he can. And he's also younger, and he probably is not as sharp cognitively, so he's not going to have maybe always the best comebacks. Now that's just I'm painting maybe a broad brush there for younger people, but just to say, the older you get, you may be a little sharper with your argumentation. I think it would be wrong to be overly hard on the Josh character, in my opinion. I didn't think he was like being super disrespectful or being out of line. He just was not very convincing. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Well, technically, I don't think Radisson was very convincing either.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think when you are forced into a situation like that where someone is so very tyrannical, personally, I think it's an obligation at times to stand against that individual. And because there could have been individuals in that class that did feel uncomfortable doing to do that kind of thing. I think that was completely in line calling him out about that, because the whole entire point of a classroom is to ensure that you're not putting students in a position where they literally have to act in a way that they see as unscrupulous. And I'm pretty sure, judging by the fact that I'd assume most people around that age group are still probably going to be mostly Christian, I'd assume that he wasn't the only one put in an awkward position. There may have even been a part in that movie, I think, where people like clapping or something like that, or I don't know, when he said his spiel.
They are clapping.
I think he got, yeah, I think people gave him a thumbs up or whatever, metaphorically speaking.
I would have called him out as an atheist. Actually, I would have been like, "This is ridiculous."
I would have too.
Like this is a very anti-skeptic, kind of a take of you're just crushing dissent, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fucking terrible. Again, that's not usually shit that I see in philosophy courses, or at least analytical ones. That is maybe
Well, when
continental
you
ones
think
are a little
about it,
different, but
you don't see like intro biology courses saying, if you don't believe in evolution, get out of the room. That would be very counterproductive because your goal should be to argue the case for it, And so, I mean, just from an all-around educational standpoint, like he was not setting himself up in a good position. If anything, he was setting himself up for Josh to drop the class, maybe get another philosophy professor, or to be like, well, I'm certainly not taking with him this semester. And I'm maybe file a complaint.
Wasn't it an introduction to philosophy course?
Yeah.
Intro to philosophy doesn't usually really even touch philosophy of religion that much. You would do more metaphysics, a little bit of logic, a little political philosophy.
Touches everything.
Even if you did philosophy of religion, what would it be, a week or two?
Yeah, we certainly, in my course, we didn't go all that in depth, but we did have a chapter where we discussed, the arguments and all that. I mean, there was Thomas Aquinas,
teleological argument and all that.
Yeah,
exactly. The big boys.
Yeah, so we got a lot. We did touch on some of the main stuff. But I mean, again, like this portrayal was just so off the wall.
Yeah.
They didn't start this movie off on a good foot, really, because it's like that's not going to happen. And if it did happen, it would have been a huge uproar. I mean, that debate would not even have gone on. Honestly, there would have been a protest about, hey, you can't force students to like do that, and it would.
That's a great point, actually, because the way I look at it is if something like that is going on, and if there's no reinforce, or if it's not sort of repelled by his superiors, that kind of not just makes him look like a dick, but it kind of makes it look like it's being institutionally reinforced.
It also doesn't show any of those characters attempting to report it. It's just kind of like, shit, we got to do this debate, I guess.
Oh, fuck, yeah. It makes it seem like, there's definitely like an atheist sort of like, an atheist that possesses all the clout and is disenfranchising other people. I think again, I realize it takes place in a philosophy classroom, and it's not necessarily speaking in a macro social kind of way, but I sort of get those vibes that it's kind of like, oh, the Christians are being oppressed, the atheists are grabbing, they're grabbing for positions of power and what have you. So I think it's interesting in that too. It plays that trope of Christians being subordinate and what have you. That wet dream that somehow
you don't even see an attempt at like, hey, this is wrong, and then the administration goes, sorry, that he gets to run the class how he wants to, stop complaining. Like it's just like, oh no, I got to do this debate and that's it. Like, it's just not very realistic at all. But
No, yeah.
I don't want to beat a dead horse.
There are some philosophy professors who have some degree of hostility toward Christianity. And I think often what people find, like when they go and like take a philosophy 101 course, that philosophy professor in many cases hasn't thought hard about the philosophy of religion since they were doing their comprehensive exams during their doctorate. Because philosophy of religion is not an area that many philosophy professors spend a lot of time in. They look at philosophy of language or aesthetics or political philosophy or philosophy of language or philosophy of mind, but they haven't spent a lot of time in philosophy of religion. And so their arguments in the philosophy of religion may be at the level of the kind of...
Yeah, I just want to say I don't know if I go that far in the political philosophy point. I really don't know if I don't really think it's more common than the debate, debating God and what have you. I definitely do agree to a certain degree that it isn't as commonplace as maybe it was decades
The
ago,
philosophy of religion?
hundreds of years ago.
Right now,
Um,
the two most popular, philosophy of religion and analytical philosophy, are like the two most popular these days.
Well, yeah, analytical philosophy is a lot more common than continental philosophy, so I'm not really sure where he's getting the political side of things from. It's just not usually something that people delve into with philosophy. Usually, if you want to talk about that shit, you're going into, you're going into political theory, you're going into sociological theory, you're going into many of those different things. That's just kind of how it is, at least here in the U.S. I've noticed it's there definitely has been the amount of continental philosophers there are now today versus in the past. I think it's diminished.
Right, dualism versus physicalism. Like, you're getting into a
It's
specific
very
area.
rare. That's got to be a rare one.
I would
Well,
say,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I get your point. I get your point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're going to have
Making
things about
tangential
like
points.
how the brain works and all that kind of stuff. Like there are
Yeah,
people who
sure,
focus on that stuff,
sure.
and then there are people who focus on more like religious type stuff. This point about political philosophy, honestly, a lot of the so-called political philosophers I see are pretty milquetoast. They're not very well rounded at all. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think that what he's saying about the representation is very accurate, just based on what I know. But I don't know enough about philosophy.
Yeah, I'm pretty damn sure pretty damn sure that most philosophers are analytical, at least.
and I would
Pretty damn
say,
confident I could get a source on that.
I'm not sure if this is true, but it seems at least this way. Most people that would focus on philosophy of religion would be a Christian or a Muslim or something like that. I
Sure.
don't think
Yeah,
many
because
atheists do.
yeah, I mean, there's such a strong consensus within philosophy now. I believe what is it like 80%, 75% of philosophers are atheists. So I think that just naturally there's going to be less contention there, and I think a lot of philosophers may feel a little bit more compelled to first and foremost speak of topics that may be a little bit more recent, but also ones that are a lot
Do
more
you have
hotly debated
do you have a
and can
source for
actually
that?
present more
Because
perspectives. Huh?
do you have a source for that? Because I know
I absolutely
scientists.
do have a source. It's like 75 to 80, somewhere around there. I can't
Wow.
quote the exact amount, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. And I absolutely can find that. I can
Okay.
get you to link, and if you
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
put it in the description of the video or whatever, I can definitely throw that at you because
Definitely.
I have it on my computer.
I do want to interject here for a moment. So a friend of mine who's in my current cohort in my grad program, she had gone into, I think, a master's philosophy program in Britain, some time ago. And what she said was that the analytic dominance is most pronounced in the United States. Actually, in some other countries, especially in Europe, there actually is a lot more continental philosophy. So
Okay.
that isn't like a source that I can cite. So I would have to look
It's so
into it.
crazy too because of Bertrand Russell. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
so crazy to think about it.
She may have been talking about France now that I think about it. I can't remember because she's been to
Oh,
both
okay.
France and Great Britain. But
I was gonna say there's a lot of analytical, well-known contemporary philosophers that are British. You know what I mean?
sure.
Especially Bertrand Russell.
But she's also talking present day, so I don't know what's changed since Bertrand Russell's days.
Introductory textbook arguments. So they're not often they're not paper tigers by any means, but they're not quite the overwhelming force that some people might think. Having said that, there's still no doubt that the average atheist philosophy professor is going to make the average Christian undergraduate look pretty foolish if he or she wants to go toe-to-toe with them. So yes, it does set people up. And even more generally as an observation, just the whole warfare model of cultural engagement that underlies the film. The fact that there's black and white, there's good and evil, we are good, the world is evil. They all want us to sign God is dead, and we're going to fight that, and we will win. There's like, and then on the other side as well, you've got the communists, because of course the one student, Chinese exchange student, his background is atheistic communism. So you've got the communists and you've got the Muslims and the animal rights activists. That's another character in the film. They're all on the other side, and we, the Christians, are on this side, and we're fighting against the world. And it's a very stark binary picture of reality, which I think just sets people up for conflict and for not recognizing the legitimate insights of the other person.
It sort of perpetuates tribalism in a lot of ways. Yeah, so that's another...
I just want to interject here because I don't think we've said it enough now that we've watched a lot of it, but I'm actually very pleasantly surprised with this video. They're more on the critical as it's gone on than on the positive, and
this is probably like 90% critical so far.
Yeah, and it's substantive critical too. So I'm quite pleased, I have to say. Like I have to give Cameron a thumbs up.
I'm a little bit pissed off. I was hoping they would present more like outlandish shit, but I'm listening to this, and it's not just like I'm saying, oh yeah, I agree, and it's like some sort of it's something that I already thought beforehand. Like they're also bringing up points where I'm like, oh wow, I didn't look at it from this angle, and so I'm like, yeah, that is true.
I will say one thing though, most of the good critiques is coming from the doctor. Cameron's mostly, it was cheesy. Even though he did have some critique.
It is less analytical. Like, but it's still good though. It's still good that he isn't like. I don't think Cameron really is this way. From most of the videos I've seen with Cameron when he does interview people, he doesn't challenge them. So I don't know if that would be, even if he did disagree, I don't know if he would do that. But I don't think that's the case though.
But he did give a pretty well thought out, critique of the representation of like the professor. Like he did break it down and be like, oh yeah, like really, like the professor's going to not be able to know how to respond to these arguments, and like really, Josh led with that argument. Like I think he actually not a bad job.
I agree.
I would hope he'd understand that though, with all the philosophers he's had on his channel. I think about it now. And I guess it's probably my error to think that he would have reacted to that any differently because he's heard all these individuals speak. So the more I look at it now, the more I'm like, okay, no, it actually makes sense that he's looking at this sort of sense of, why do you hate God kind of, if you even want to call that a rebuttal to everything that the atheistic professor was sort of subjecting his students to. It makes sense that Cameron would react that way. So I think I kind of sold him short that way, admittedly.
Yeah.
Although that is a funny scene because at no point is the student at that stage even trying to rebut the arguments that were put forth. It's kind of like, oh, but why do you hate God? And then sob and it gets all the emotions run high, and then the story goes in a totally different direction. Like in terms of like the arguments going back and forth, they got really sloppy there at the end, especially.
Well, I really like the movie.
I really like that point you make, that the atheist is sort of like is miserable, which is kind of a common thread with all these movies.
One thing I just want to really come back to is how extraordinarily offensive the ending is. So again, the juxtaposition of the ending is that everybody goes to that Newsboy concert, and then the guy from Duck Dynasty comes on wearing a big American bandana. So I'm a Canadian. I kind of noticed the nationalist sides of things.
Hey.
And then so in terms of patriotism and Christian conservatism is all kind of linked together. But then he gives this address on the video screen to the audience where he talks about affirming Josh, who's in the audience, as this Christian kid who defeated the atheist philosophy professor. And then the concert hall goes crazy, it goes wild. And then he asks
And then they
everybody.
dedicate a song to him.
Yeah, they dedicate the song "God's Not Dead," and then the Duck Dynasty guy asks everybody to text "God's Not Dead" to your 100 contacts. Meanwhile, outside the concert hall, Radisson, the atheist philosophy professor, was looking for his Christian girlfriend that he alienated. And while he's looking for her, he gets hit by a car. And as he's dying, the pastor and missionary come up to him, and they don't do CPR. They don't encourage him, like in terms of, you're going to get through this, man. Instead, they tell him, you're going to die.
I thought about that when I saw the scene. Like, he's dying, he's dying.
I forgot about
he got
that,
Jesus.
Oh God! Talk about judge, jury, and executioner right there. It's like,
Yeah.
you're gonna die.
He got the Jesus dick. He's okay. He's got okay.
No, what's worse about it though is the like literally this guy dies right after they do that moment of like, you know, when you convert to Christ or whatever, and like the moment after it's confirmed he died, everyone jumps up and celebrates. Meanwhile, this dead body's just lying there, and it's like, oh my God,
That's
like,
very fucking
no remorse
draconian,
for
is
the
it not?
fact that this guy just died. Like,
Isn't
oh
that
my
very
God.
draconian though? Like it paints a very draconian image of like how to like treat atheists sort of in that sense. Again, I'm not saying they made any explicit claims, but when you're talking about symbolic interactionism, you have to wonder these things with movies because they can be very subtle. You know what I mean?
But it even gets worse if you think about, forget Radisson. He was a dick, but he was just a dick. Imagine he was a serial killer. He killed his whole life, and he was an atheist, and then the last second, he goes, oh yes, I accept God. Would he go into heaven?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question to ask Protestants.
It certainly speaks to a certain theology, and because that kind of idea of like, well, wait a second, he's kind of got a sweet deal here because he gets to die at just the right moment where he can make that last moment conversion, and
Clean
then he
getaway.
gets to spend all of his days in heaven. Meanwhile, 2 blocks up the road, some other atheist gets hit by a car too, but he doesn't have the pastor, everyone to help him out in that moment, mostly because like he died on impact. And like, sorry, he goes to hell, you know.
I always wondered that, maybe a little bit irrelevantly, but I always found it funny how some people, maybe they have a near-death experience or something like that, or they have that last glimmer looking up into the sky, and they could actually repent or rescind or whatever it is that they may do. And I look at it, and I've listened to some near-death experiences, and there's people that do really fucking stupid shit. And it's like they're rewarded almost in a way when they have these experiences. When I look at other people that they may live a fine life, they live a healthy life, they do all those other things, and they're not put in that position to be able to repent and rescind and whatnot. So I always wonder that. I'm like, it's funny how some people they could live a terrible lifestyle. They could eat 10,000 goddamn cheeseburgers and they're rewarded with fucking life. But someone who's eating the Caesar salads, oh no, those fuckers are going to hell. You know what I mean? Because they weren't conferred the opportunity. So
yeah, well, I was just saying, it gets to that whole thing of like, well, why can't everybody have a road to Damascus experience? Like where you have this like this moment that for you was convincing.
We need to equally distribute the Damascus.
The top 1/10, the 1% of all road to Damascus experiences shall be fairly distributed across the country.
Anyways, yeah.
That. How did they know that in the first place? Like the guy, it's basically the missionary gets up, the black guy, and he's like, "Oh look, all his ribs are crushed. He's gonna die." And it's like, you know that because you're a missionary? I mean,
it's bad writing. I mean, he does not know that. He's not a medical professional. So it's just that the screenwriters just want. I mean, Radisson needs to die. The plot requires him to die, and so of course the whole irony is he had them write out God is dead at the beginning, but in fact at the end it's the philosophy professor who dies. And the moment in the song where the guys from Newsboys are singing of God, that he's roaring, I wrote it down, he's roaring like a lion. And at that moment that they're singing that, they show the pastor and missionary standing over the dying philosophy professor. So the idea clearly here of the filmmakers is God, the one that the philosophy professor had said is dying, is in fact roaring while the philosophy professor dies.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I could definitely, from this guy's perspective, that this movie in a sense, definitely puts Christians in a negative light, and I could see him being sort of ashamed by that so significantly because it may lead others to believe that he thinks in such a way. Because we all know how logic and generalizations go. They're not exactly rare.
It was a day of rejoicing. I mean, I understand because he made a deathbed conversion, right? I understand how they would be happy that he made this deathbed conversion. But frankly, having a big grin on your face while this corpse is lying in the street is just, again, it's a little bit off-putting, I would say. And it just shows that the filmmakers are just not in tune with any sort of emotional quotient, an EQ, an emotional.
One thing I do want to say, I agree, it's disgusting. But really, if God is real and he's going to the most wonderful place in the world, wouldn't that be a happy thing?
Well, that's their take, and that's why they did it. But I mean, realistically, and this is how I think it is for most Christians in just reality. It may be all fine, well, and good that one's going to be going to this really great place, but that doesn't change the fact that this person is no longer here for you to enjoy and to celebrate their life.
Well, I agree, but these people weren't his friends or anything like that for him to enjoy.
Sure.
So for them, maybe they should have been happy.
Well, I mean, isn't there a time and a place? I mean, the body's lying right there, and I mean, to me, it felt very opportunistic the way they did it. I don't know. That's just how it came across.
I agree with you, but I'm saying in their if you take their view to the extreme, let's say.
Sure. Oh no. I mean, it makes total sense that they reacted the way they did based on their view. That I
still think that's quite unrealistic, though. Even for a Christian, I feel like there's.
I'm not saying Christians would act that way.
No, I know you're not. I know you're.
Well, I would even say that the fundamentalists, the extreme fundamentalism that they're depicting, a lot of them on paper may describe a scene just like that. But in practice, I just really don't see them acting it out. What people are going to argue on paper and what they really do in their regular daily life are two separate things.
Yeah, I think that biological state of urgency would, it would make you dead set on what's going on, and you're not thinking about anything else on a significantly conscious level.
Awareness of how we should interact with one another and treat outsiders.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot I can disagree with there. So the last thing that I have, and we're going to close this out. So I have a couple slides here prepared, and this is by some people who are critical of the film, and these are both Christians. And I think that these kind of summarize some of the thoughts that we've had so far. This one's by Michael Gerson. The main problem with God's Not Dead is not its cosmology or ethics, but its anthropology. It assumes that human beings are made out of cardboard. Academics are arrogant and cruel. Liberal bloggers are preening and snarky. Unbelievers disbelieve because of personal demons. It is a characterization by caricature. I think that that's completely true. It's something that we talked about throughout the review. Next one is by John Molderig, and he's another Christian. He says, there might be the kernel of an intriguing documentary buried within director Harold Cronk's stacked deck drama, given the extent of real-life academic hostility toward religion. And they even at the end of the film, they have some cases that they're trying to legitimize what they've done in the film. But anyways, going on, he says, but even faith-filled moviegoers, and this is what I sensed, will sense the claustrophobia of the echo chamber within which this largely unrealistic picture unfolds. I think that those two guys pretty much summarize my thoughts on the film and how it was in a lot of ways. It was just like a Christian. I don't want to call it fundamentalist. It was almost fundamentalist in certain ways, the attack on evolution and stuff. But the fact that it's just like a kind of an echo chamber-ish film.
Yeah, I mean, we throw around the term fundamentalism a lot, so I always like to define it because sometimes it just gets used as an insult. So when I say fundamentalism, of course, it historically traces back to about 1 century ago in the teens of the last century. It was a movement that arose to oppose modernism within theological schools and culture. But in terms of the general idea, fundamentalism is sort of a reactionary position that uses simple black and white categories in order to retrench against a wider culture. And I think that you very much see that in this film. So there's this term ghettoization or the ghettoization of culture. And I think that you have that in this film, where you sort of get Christians retrenching in their own little fundamentalist ghetto, opposed to the world and kind of fearful of the world around them. And I think that the descriptions you read are spot on. I think in particular the sort of cardboard cutouts you get of this worldview. And I think that the one thing that Christians are often afraid of is to have nuance and ambiguity in their films and in their cultural products. They want to have everything black and white so everybody knows exactly what to think at the end of it. And the irony is how different that worldview is from Scripture. The Bible is not what you would produce if you wanted to just be completely clear. You would just produce a list of propositions. Okay, this is what you believe and this is how you believe it. Instead, the Bible is a complex genre of literature, and Christians have had various different interpretations of various aspects of it for 2,000 years. And I think that we should try exploring some degree of that complexity and nuance in our cultural productions as well, rather than just have these kind of black and white cardboard stereotypes that you see in this film.
Yeah, and we want to encourage people to foster like good conversations with unbelievers, people that disagree with you. It doesn't just have to be Christian versus atheist. Anybody that you're talking to, I that's one of the things that I try to combat is the whole tribalism thing, and I fall into it myself. It's like it's so rampant throughout culture. It's really easy, I should say. It's really easy to just fall into the same rut and just, atheists versus Christians, and these guys are so stupid, so moronic, so idiotic. And it's easy to fall into that like mentality of just these other people who we disagree with are complete morons, they're irrational, they're not really thinking through their views, they're motivated by certain emotional things that are going on beneath the surface. Both people on both sides can fall into that. But I think that in our media and in everything else and what we do, what we need to be promoting is good dialogue. Just doesn't have to be, you don't have to be uncharitable toward people, you don't have to build stereotypes. And unfortunately, I think that's sort of a lot of what this film was based around. And it also did, like I mentioned, it was a really, I think that there is a good chance that some students were encouraged to go challenge their professors because of this film, because it looked like it was just so easy, and these arguments are just so easy to learn and even master. Like at the point where when he was talking, he was so confident in the way that he was talking. I think that's a really big concern that I have. Well, do you have anything to conclude our first movie review with, Randall?
Well, I just like to underscore the point you just made. Rather than have a sort of hubris or an overconfidence about what we know, a healthy degree of intellectual humility will go a long way to build bridges with other peoples if you want to have an effective apologetic. And you don't get that in this film.
Yeah, we kind of had a long period of just letting them talk, and I think it was probably because they were saying a lot of decent stuff. But
I really appreciated how there was kind of like there's kind of a horseshoe thing going. Like I wasn't expecting that. I really wasn't expecting to sort of be in line with damn near everything they said. I thought it was going to be the exact opposite. I thought myself agreeing with like probably 90% of the stuff that they said, and I totally thought it was going to be the other way around. So it was a pleasant surprise, in all honesty, because I walked away with different viewpoints, and it also brightens my viewpoint as well of Christians, because I haven't spoken to too many Christians that have seen this movie in general. So to actually hear it from a more critical standpoint is great. And I thought it's also great that they also showed the quotes at the end, because it does provide emphasis to kind of get away from that sort of caricature as they were referencing, to try and give more perspectives of that. And I thought that was great. I thought that the quotes they showed had great rhetoric. It touched a lot of the points that we did, but still great rhetoric, I thought. And I actually didn't mind that video. That may be one of his better videos I think I've seen.
I really liked Dr. Rausser's emphasis on actually it was both of them on this, and I think Cameron was the last one to point it out, was this focus on open conversation and just good dialogue. The debates, or so-called, we'll put air quote debates, that I enjoyed the most were the ones where it was just kind of a free, open dialogue. Maybe they both had an opening statement, but then it was just a back and forth for a long time before maybe a
Right.
Q&A session. I'm not a big fan of those so-called hyper-formal debates where it's like, okay, you get 10 minutes.
20 minutes here, 20 minutes there.
Yeah, I just don't like that. It doesn't really help to foster good arguments and, any kind of progress, because it's all kind of pasted together and it's all based on being, there's your adversary. You need to knock his 10-minute argument down and that kind of thing. Whereas kind of an open dialogue, it's like, we don't know where this is going to go, and we're hoping both of us come out of this better, that kind of a thing.
And I think it's a lot easier to obviously respond to points. I feel like when you got that 20 by 20 kind of format, or whatever the format is, it's timed. I think a lot of points get lost.
Yeah.
So I do like that a lot better, that open sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I really did kind of like that. I do get the impression from him that he's a lot more concerned with actually trying to find out more information than he is to try and find information for a pre-established position. That is sort of the interpretation that I got from him. So again, pretty refreshing.
You can avoid the kind of gish gallop that goes on where someone tries to overload someone with so many things that they can't respond to. And I've seen examples of that on both sides. Where someone will try to what's his name? The one who has he calls himself Dr. Dino. He's anti-evolution and all that type of stuff. Ken Hovind. Ken Hovind does it. So there's an example. So on a theist side, and although I enjoy a lot of his stuff, Aaron Raw does a lot of stuff like that. I've seen him in some of his debates where he spouts out so much stuff, and there's just no way someone could adequately respond to it, in their follow up. And there's
more
probably
like they're giving a presentation than an argument sometimes. They're just going point by point, like literally from a PowerPoint.
Yeah, exactly.
Daniel.
Yes.
Any points? What were your thoughts?
I totally agree with both what you said. I'm very surprised that everything that they said, that it was very much more in line with our thinking. I figured it was going to all be slight derision on the movie, but mostly, it's a great movie. It's a great Christian movie. Now, they did view 3 IMDb comments. Let's see if we could find any. I guarantee they didn't view any in the other direction.
Not that there's a whole lot of good comments to pick from.
Yeah.
But, you really got to do some dumpster diving.
There's 11,000.
What?
Who gave it a number 10?
Jesus.
What makes it really high is there's also 10,000 that gave it a number 1.
Right.
So let's just see if we could, and then everybody else is in the middle.
Right. Oh, gotta love all that polarization there.
Now, I mean,
it's a very polar movie, so it's not very surprising that most of them are all the way on the polar ends.
Yeah, the thing is, I would bet most of the bad.
Can I read a review real quick? This is off of Amazon Prime for God's Not Dead.
Okay.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. So this guy, it says top contributor to the guitarist section. So it's like, yeah, we're really looking forward to his movie review. So he gives it 5 out of 5. Great movie. He says, I loved it. His proof of God is as good in this limited format as I could expect. One of the best things this movie has done for me is to introduce me to Oxford mathematician John C. Lennox and his books, as well as the Newsboys, both highly recommended.
It's like an atheist went on there and actually tried to be an absolute troll. I can't believe how some people, we're talking about caricatures so much, and it's funny, you read stuff like that and it's people do act like caricatures at times. I know that I know they spoke a little bit about the binary, saying that some people don't act this way, and of course I don't think it's that clean, but man, there's some people that they'll suck up whatever whatever information their perspective throws out, and they're just a fucking vacuum. They are what they fucking suck up. So it's just what their position sucks up more or less. But Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how common those people are. That people do think it's complete shit, or it's. I mean, it's
terrible.
kind of hard to stay in the middle with it. It was so fucking bad.
Well, I remember when it came out, and I was still like, religious at the time, and I had like all these text messages come through when it on its like release day, and people
they
saying
say
God's not
God's
dead.
not
I
dead.
I
found it.
did too.
I
I
found
did
it to
too.
be like one of the most cringy things ever. Like I was never a fan of that kind of stuff. So
Ryan, I
That's how
thought
you know it's propaganda. Like the whole dissemination fucking component of that's huge in propaganda.
maybe Ryan was going to be one of the recipients of the God's Not Dead mass text at the end of the movie. But
Yeah.
if you look like on IMDb, there's a lot of people saying how amazing this movie is,
I
enlightening.
can't believe
I
that.
can't.
I can't imagine what they think about the third one.
don't you like evidence, man? It's right in your eyes.
Could you imagine someone actually taking a philosophy course after watching this movie, and they're like, oh man, like they're inspired by like Josh, and they're like, man, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna try and find an atheist professor, and then they actually go into the classroom and it's fucking nothing like that. Could you imagine that? Because that's what I garner from people that are giving it these 5 stars or whatever.
10
Is that
stars.
10 stars? Okay, again, I don't know what the rating system is, but giving a good rating. Point being, and I can't believe there's people that actually think that like this actually reflects reality. Because I don't know how you could, I don't know how the fuck you could give it a good rating and not think it doesn't reflect reality. Um, I feel like that's kind of a predicate condition when you give something a good rating if it's not fictional. Which again, I understand like the characters aren't real or stuff, but it's
Yeah.
generally not too. They're not like shooting each other with fucking space lasers.
Yeah,
being
whenever
like,
I
how
make-
dare you fucking believe in God, but yeah, I can't believe that. I can't
I
believe
mean,
that there's
unless
people. It doesn't surprise me, but it also does at the same time. It's just like I know there's people out there that are that they're that in tune with their perspective that they're so very closed off from other perspectives. But it's a whole other thing when you actually read reviews from people and you actually listen to their mindset and how limited it actually is. It's just it's so different. You know what I mean?
unless the rating is rate this relative to a 3-hour movie of just a shot of a cardboard box, right? Because now
Oh
it's
yeah,
okay,
it's just all right. Just all right.
You know what? I'm still not sure. Especially if I was a cat.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I'm pleasantly surprised with this review, and overall, it wasn't bad.
Yeah, same here.
I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. I found myself agreeing, like I said, with most of it. So to me, that's a big deal. That's a big deal because I came into this with strong bias, and I think that's just because of my pre-exposure to his videos. I definitely don't find myself agreeing with most of his points when he does speak against anything an atheist says or whatever. So yeah, this was actually like this was a huge change from the content that I've seen from him. Like it was, but I guess it's kind of unfortunate it took it took a movie like that, I guess, in a sense. It's good that wasn't that lost in it, where he was just like, no, it wasn't that bad. But I guess it is unfortunate that it took a movie that was just that far out there to garner that kind of reaction. But hey, it is what it is. Either way, video was good.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.